And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author, Dr. Stephen J. Jensen, author of Living the Good Life, A Beginner's Thomistic Ethics, published by the Catholic University of America Press. Welcome, Professor, to EWTN.
Thank
now,
you,
what's
Doug.
interesting, though, is you don't teach at Catholic University, but you're published by Catholic University. Where do you actually teach?
I teach at the University of St. Thomas. It's in Houston, Texas.
Okay. And so why would Catholic U publish this book?
Well, Catholic U is interested in Catholic topics when they publish. They publish more than anything else in the philosophy and theology domain, and they're interested in promoting Catholic authors.
Now, as a professor, do you have to write books to stay, up to speed, and that's part of your academic responsibility? Do you like to write books? Where does this one fall in?
Well, this one definitely falls into I love to write books,
Okay.
but I mean there is a certain level where you want to keep publishing, whether it's books or articles at a university of any sort. You do have to publish some, but introductory level books are not the sort that will push your career in that way.
Right. Now, you're writing here about St. Thomas, and it was interesting, too, a very simple thing of understanding why he was called the dumb ox. Can you explain why he had that nickname?
He sat in class and he listened. He didn't speak up much in class, and so people said he was dumb. He was also considered fairly large. For his day and age, he was very large. He was 6 feet tall or so, in a day and age when people may have been 5'5" on average or something.
Now, was he as rotund as they say he was? I mean, there was a story about cutting out a slice into the table so he could fit in there, or is that overdone?
So far as we can tell, that's a little bit of mythology involved.
Okay.
So.
It's also interesting because a lot of times you hear dumb ox and you're thinking that somebody's saying pejoratively he was stupid and they didn't buy what he had to say. But you're saying dumb in the sense of not speaking a lot, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So that his teacher, Albertus Magnus, said that when indeed we would begin to speak, he would be heard around the world.
Okay, and that's what he said. In the introduction, you kind of go through this discussion about a narrator sliding down a swamp and ending up in Auschwitz, and then you go to say, well, Jesus Christ said the truth will set you free. Today we profess the truth will chain you down. It leads not to freedom, but to Auschwitz. Why has it changed so much?
Well, because people want to satisfy their desires and the truth gets in the way. So if the truth tells me that I can't have an abortion, but I want an abortion because it's convenient, then I don't want the truth. And so people will start proclaiming the truth as the enemy rather than the friend.
Mm-hmm. Also, you make the point here, you talk about Nazism came to power in the wake of decadent relativism, because I think you're talking about the fact that many times people who seem to be standing up for what society sees are rigid rules or disciplines are Nazis. And your point is the Nazis were relativists, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
So before the Nazis came to power in Germany, relativism was widespread, and the Nazis took advantage of that. Their semi-official philosopher was Friedrich Nietzsche, who proclaimed, let's get beyond good and evil and just have a will to power.
That's right. We hear that term when we say get will to power. What does that mean? How would you see that realized today in our own society?
Well, Nietzsche viewed it as a particularly strong man, which Hitler viewed himself as a particularly
Uberman,
the Ubermensch, yeah. So but I think it's democratized in our society, I guess you might put it that way. So we don't want the one man who dominates the others, but we all want to dominate in the sense of being in complete control of our own life and not having to submit to anything, including God's law.
Is that where you get that every viewpoint is on equal footing, none is better than another?
Correct.
So that's how we see that. But you say ideas have consequences, but that's another thing. It doesn't seem like in today's society people believe it really has consequences. At least if it's bad consequences for me, it's not really my fault.
Yeah, people seem to think, well, it's just a matter of the economy or something like that. That's all they worry about, and they won't worry if somebody's teaching some bad philosophy. But in fact, we will be led into chains precisely because of bad philosophy.
Right. You say, as history tells us, we abandon the truth at our own risk. But yet, we seem to not pay attention to history. Is very important to most people today. it seems to be that there's, and you're, as a teacher, do you see this kind of downplaying of history, which leads sometimes to the idea that what we're doing today is what we've been doing for a long time, which may not be, in fact, be true?
Well, history does repeat itself, so we see that, but we haven't been going this extreme for a long time, I guess would be my way of putting it.
Now, you say we should welcome the truth where we find it, we should reject what is false. But how do we know what's true, and how do we know what's false?
Well, if we have the aid of faith, that's nice, but I wrote a book in philosophy which tells us that we have to come to the truth by making observations in the world around us. When it comes to the truth that we're concerned with here, moral truth,
Right.
We have to make observations about ourselves and what we are, what our human nature is.
Now, you say Aquinas hit upon much of the truth with a little admixture of error. What does that mean?
With little admixture of error.
Right.
That means that, if you're looking at percentages, he'd be batting pretty high,
So he was right 95% of the
95% of the time or something
Okay.
like that, yeah.
Where would be the times where you would say, or we'd look today and say, maybe he didn't quite get it right?
Well, what's typically referred to is the teaching on the Immaculate Conception, that he thought that this was unlikely, not much of a possibility.
Right, right. So that's the dons.
That's, of course, a theological
Right.
point. Otherwise, I would be reluctant to make past judgments myself.
And you
let's say.
even say in the book you don't really get into deeply into the underlying arguments or even the disagreements, and that you really kind of put forth the ones that the vast majority of people all kind of accept, right?
Correct.
So that was really, it's interesting too. I'm thinking of Duns Scotus and of course the Immaculate Conception and where the dunce kind of came from or got used, and you've got the dumb oxel. It's interesting how truth tellers at different level get these interesting nicknames. You say that not only did Aquinas happen upon true statements, he understood them.
Right. So, I mean, there's a difference between being able to say that it's true that abortion is wrong and to be able to explain why it is. And Aquinas isn't just listing a bunch of truths. He digs deeper and understands why it's the case.
You also talk about, and that's the part you just said, Aquinas is adept at uncovering the root causes of things. It's interesting today because for many, many years it seemed like in this society we were always talking about root causes of everything. It doesn't seem like we talk about those anymore.
Yeah, I suppose not. I don't think we want to waste our time, is our attitude
It's too complicated.
towards it. Yeah.
Might get in the way of what I already believe, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Now he supposedly had a photographic memory and was given the gift, he said, of understanding everything he read.
So
Did he understand everything he wrote then? I guess too.
I presume he did,
Right.
yes.
But he also has that famous story which you talk about how at the last year of his life he stopped writing, right?
Correct. So he wrote prodigiously. He would be writing 3, maybe 5 books at a time because he had secretaries that he would dictate to, and his mind was working so fast he could work much faster than his secretaries. So he wrote voluminously, yet in the last several months of his life he quit writing entirely. And his friends came to him and said, well, you've got to finish some of these things. These are great things. And his response was that compared to what has been revealed to me, everything that I have written is as straw. So he had some sort of mystical experience, and after that, he didn't write.
And you make the point, he was not saying, of course, that everything he had written before was false.
Correct.
Right.
Just if you compare any writing to God,
Right. It's going
it's
to
insignificant.
fall amazingly short.
Yeah.
But then you also say, if Aquinas' works are like straw, then woe to the rest of us. And that's sometimes, I think, where people feel. They say, well, if he can't get it right, what's the point of me even trying?
Well,
why should you even write
again,
this book?
But saying it's straw isn't saying he didn't get it right. You have to remember. So, but yeah, I mean, it's good to be humbled to say, well, I can understand so much, but I don't understand nearly all that Thomas understood.
Okay. You're saying, let's talk about the book itself and how you put it together as a primer, basically, for people. In each chapter, you use the ideas of Aquinas to address some common views associated with ethics today. The second chapter challenges the common perception that ethics is only about what is right or wrong. Then what is it about?
It's about what is most fulfilling for us as human beings. So we typically say, oh, it's just a matter of it's right to help out the poor, it's wrong to steal. And if we ask questions, well, but what way of life is fulfilling for you, we might end up saying, well, maybe that's psychology that's going to tell us that and not ethics. In fact, ethics is going to tell us precisely what is most fulfilling of us.
Right, and you talk about, in that chapter, you talk about the idea of talking about Plato's Republic and then a comparison between Socrates and Jesus.
Yeah, Socrates, he proclaimed the truth in a way that wasn't very popular, just as Jesus did. He would go around questioning people and in the end showed that they didn't know what they were talking about. And so he became the target of the political powers at the time, and he ended up being put to death even as Jesus was put to death. Is
it really better to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a satisfied pig?
Definitely. So a satisfied pig, this is an image from John Stuart Mill. A satisfied pig doesn't mean literally a pig. It means living your life like a pig. So all you want is food, all you want is pleasure of various sorts. And even if you have dissatisfied pleasures, but you have the depth of understanding that Socrates has, it's a much more gratifying life.
You talk about, in this section, about this, something I lived through, the 60s and 70s, the human potential movement. Fulfillment can only be found in realizing our potential. You say they missed the mark because they turn to emotions rather than to human reason and will. Explain.
Right. So they're on the mark, as we've just been talking about, by saying that what really matters is fulfilling our potential, that realizing what's truly fulfilling of us. But they said to figure out what's truly fulfilling of us, sort of look inside, this internal navel gazing almost, and look at your feelings and discover your real self in those feelings. Aquinas, he's not going to ignore the feelings. They're important for Aquinas, but he's going to say, look, what's most important is that we have the capacity with our reason to discover what's truly good for us. And the feelings should really follow that. So if I come to understand that I shouldn't be focusing just on the pleasure of the food, but maybe the company that I'm eating with, right? I can understand that with my reason, but maybe I've developed a habit with the emotions where I really just focus on the pleasure so much. That's a problem.
Okay. And you talk also about the idea that we must better understand what is right and wrong. And then you go on to say, furthermore, morality and human law are not the same because laws can be wrong. I would think that's certainly an American problem because we're very much oriented, I believe, towards laws and morality are supposed to be in sync.
Yeah, well, they're supposed to be in sync. I think that's true, yeah. But a lot of times people just think, well, all you have to pay attention to is what the law tells you. But the law can be mistaken, clearly was mistaken, say, in Nazi Germany.
And you talk all about that, obviously, right.
So what we have to recognize is, apart from the law, we can discover what's really good and what really we should do, and sometimes the law will misguide us.
Now you say ethics is not the same as religion, and you can also have ethics without religion. Many atheists have high ethical standards, so why do we need religion?
Well, I think most people are going to need religion. Aquinas talks about why do we have faith for things that we can know about. So he says some of the things we can know, we can even know, prove that God exists. Why do we need faith for that? And Aquinas says, well, most people are not actually going to understand these truths. They just don't have enough time. They're not well enough educated. And so, yeah, we could figure out ethics, but in our society, there's a lot of confusion. It's not likely. Most people are going to need the guidance of faith to show them the truth.
Now, in the third chapter, you bring up something I thought was dead and buried, or maybe it's just so part of our culture we don't talk about it. Values clarification, very big movement in the 60s and the 70s. Kind of a sociological approach to things. Some people claimed it destroyed some religious orders out on the West Coast. Talking about clarifying values of decision making, we were told that we must find our own values, and we do so by looking inside insight to what our feelings.
Right.
So it dovetails on what you said.
You're right. And I suppose it's dead in a sense, in the sense that people aren't referring to it, but it's not dead in the sense that the ideas aren't there anymore. And in fact, I think in our high schools, our public schools throughout the country, these very ideas are being taught to our children.
Well, you even refer them, in a sense, as a form of self-deception.
Yeah, because again, I want to satisfy my emotions, and so I'm going to tell myself that this is the real me, if in fact it looks like I can satisfy my emotions that way.
Well, values clarification says that wanting it makes it good. Thomas says that it's being good should lead us to want it. Of course, we don't always want the things we should. If someone we know gets a promotion, we should feel happy for her or him, but instead we might feel envy.
Yeah, so again, this goes back to the idea that you don't look inside your feelings to figure out what's best. You look out in the world with your reason you can discover. And one of those things you can discover is that the human good is not just mine, it's shared between various people. And so if this person gets a promotion, well, your good is shared with that person's good, and so you should be happy about that. But we have our emotions, part of original sin, where we might
still
feel...
have that? You don't hear that very much
Yeah,
anymore.
well, it's still there, I'm afraid. Whether you hear about it or not, it's still there.
We see it lived out every day on the news, but we may not talk about what it is.
So.
And it's interesting that you bring that up. You also talk about this little example of desiring the pocket money. I'm on where I want. I finally declare that taking the money is good. And you say, according to Aquinas, the movement of the way that works is in reverse of what it should be.
Right. So what it should be is, this money does not belong to me, I should return it. So I recognize that with my reason, and then with my emotions, I should actually want to return it. And the direction given there of this values clarification is, well, I want to take it, so I'm going to come up with some kind of excuse, you know, finders keepers.
Which rolls right into the whole idea of rationalization. To assuage the discomfort, I now enlist reason in another role, justifying my evil desires. A rationalization then has 3 steps. We begin by realizing what is truly right and wrong. We desire what is wrong. We come with a quasi-moral reason for following our evil desires.
Precisely.
Sounds like a daily experience in most people's lives.
Exactly.
You say, according to Thomas, emotions are shared with the animals while reason is found in human beings alone. I guess that goes back to your pig analogy there earlier. But why is that important for people? It seems like today, in some ways, people assign these kind of, as if we're all the same. Maybe it's an expanded Darwinianism or something.
Yeah, no, it's there is an effort to sort of level human beings. The irony is it's never ultimately bringing animals up, it's bringing human beings down, I think, is the ultimate goal that's involved. So that if we're just like the animals, then just like the animals, we go satisfy our pig lives in whatever way our desires pull us.
Right. In chapter 4, you talk about conscience and choice. And we hear about this a lot. You've got to follow your conscience. St. Thomas said you have to follow your conscience. Newman says we have to follow. The Holy Father says we have to follow our conscience. You say the trouble with both these sayings, and you talk about in here, is that they're too expansive. All that matters is that you do what you believe. Just follow your conscience. So you're saying that's true, but there's something wrong with that approach.
Yeah, well, if you take out that word just, then you'll be okay. So follow your conscience is okay, but the word just is what's problematic. So if you stick in that word just, it seems to leave everything just, again, subjective, whatever I think. Whereas what Aquinas says is, besides following your conscience, really, I suppose, in some sense, part of following your conscience, is informing your conscience. So that means my conscience isn't just whatever subjective beliefs I happen to have. My conscience is what I have formed by looking into the matter and discovering the truth of what's good and evil.
Our conscience then is our judgment about what is morally right and wrong, either generally or in here and now. We must also understand an erroneous or misinformed conscience, which is a conscience that makes the wrong judgment. So, and then he goes on to say, are we morally obligated to follow an erroneous conscience? Second, are we excused for following a misinformed conscience? Because I think that's the other thing. We end up with this kind of invincible ignorance argument, which is to say, well, my intentions were good. I guess I was misinformed, so I'm not really accountable.
Right. So it's really that second question I spend much more time with, and which, as you point out, is the one that really plagues us in the world today. So am I excused? I've got this misinformed conscience, and am I excused for following it? As you know, it gets a little bit involved, but basically it's a question of, were you misinformed because of your own choices, or maybe it was just because of your societal upbringing or something like that? So if it's a matter of your own choices, and it could be as simple as I chose to watch some trivial TV show rather than think about what I should do with my life. It's not choices as in not necessarily a choice as in I deliberately choose to confuse myself about abortion. It's just I choose entertainment over what might be more important. As a result, I don't know what's important in my life, and now my conscience is misinformed. I follow it. Aquinas' answer to that question is, but you're not excused for following it. You're still to blame, and you're to blame precisely because you did not do that extra thing, namely inform your conscience.
But if I happen to have a honestly misinformed conscience, and I have to make a decision, do I have to go with what my misinformed conscience thinks is right?
Yeah, of course you stuck in that word honestly, which really implies that you didn't make the choice that led you there. Then yeah, absolutely. You have to, even if it ends up being a wrong choice, objectively speaking, you have to follow.
Well, it's interesting too, because they used to say hard cases make bad law, and Abelard's got this whole thing. These 1,000,000 to 1 people come up with these situations, because later in the book you talk about the idea: is there anything that's really intrinsically evil?
Right. Abelard has very interesting examples. He has the example of a man who sleeps with a woman that's not his wife, but he thinks that it is his wife.
Right.
How that sort of mistake might happen is a little perplexing, although he probably is actually referring to Rachel and Leah in the Old Testament.
Right.
But he also talks about something that does happen. A brother and sister marry and commit incest, but they don't know that they're brother and sister when they do so. So he has these. But these sort of examples are kind of an acid, you might say, to sort of wear away people's sense that there really is a standard out there that applies to people. Because ultimately this is connected to the question of conscience, that, if somebody really didn't know that it was his sister that he married, then he's not to blame for it. That doesn't take away the absolute moral norm that incest is wrong. Right. It just takes away the blame from this person who performed this action.
Now, did Thomas Aquinas actually play Clue?
No, he did not.
Okay. But he is familiar with Colonel Mustard and Miss Scarlet.
Well, he must be, at least if you believe me in my book, yes.
Okay.
So,
my guess is he would have figured out who actually did the murder. Now he says, why is there an asymmetry such that good actions can become evil, but evil actions cannot become good? Now that's a thing where we deal with a lot of people talk about situational ethics and the idea that, and I think one of the examples in the book is the idea of a ruler's going to kill 20 people. He says to you, well, if you kill one of them, I'll leave the other 19 alone. And people would say, well, I'm killing one to save the 19.
Exactly. So does that make it good to kill the one? And what you just quoted is saying, no. If you take an evil action, killing an innocent human being, there's nothing that's going to transform that to good. You can take a good action. Aquinas' typical example is giving money to the poor, and you can make that evil. And his reason for making it evil, well, you do it for vainglory. You just want everybody to say, oh, what a wonderful guy, So you take what was good and make it evil, but you cannot take what's evil and turn it into good.
Just before we go, ultimately, Thomas rejects the situational ethics that would leave everything up to circumstances, which honestly we hear a lot about today, in some places being proffered around the church. Effectively, that's what people are kind of saying. It really always depends on the circumstances. But you point out we should not become so overawed by the gray areas of life that we forget the black and white.
Right. So, I mean, there are gray areas.
Right.
That's certainly the case. And people will point out the gray areas and sort of, by implication, everything's gray. Okay. So it may be difficult to say, should I help out this person now or go on my way to work? You know, because I do have to go to work, but this person's in need. Okay, that's a difficult question. But it's not a difficult question for something like abortion. Should I kill my unborn child? There's black and white there, and we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Right, because I may be able to take the money that I would spend on that child to pay for my other child to go to Catholic school. Or some
Right.
other decision like rationalization
Doesn't
like that.
change it.
So let me ask you just before we go, how long did it take you to write the book?
Took me about 6 months, I would say. I've been teaching for years, so this is just
Okay.
the fruits of teaching.
So is this an accumulation of material you've used in classes before and you kind of put it together?
Correct.
Okay, you have another book in the works?
I do have another book that's similar in that sense. It's called The Human Person, A Beginner's Thomistic Psychology.
Okay.
So it's meant as a sort of follow-up. And I've taught a course called The Human Person for years. And again, it's the fruits of teaching.
Okay, very good.
So-
Dr. Stephen J. Jensen, thank you much for stopping by Bookmark. And the book is Living the Good Life, A Beginner's Thomistic Ethics. Very interesting, published by the Catholic University American Press, and very accessible. And it's also accessible through our EWTN religious catalog, EWTNRC.com. You can get it there. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.